visiting gardens at the same time.
Nice, they go to nice places.
Exactly, I know.
Yeah. They're doing well?
They're doing very well, thank you. Yeah.
Hi, Jeff.
Hello.
Mary, did you want to say hi?
I did.
Okay. Okay. I just
6:30
wanted to
on the
make
dot.
sure.
Okay, 6:30 on my computer, so I would like to call the meeting to order. Would everybody please stand for the pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Sure.
Yeah, I thought I'd introduce some of our guests. First, why don't we start with Mariana? Mariana Politas Tasia, or is it Tasia Politas now? Is here, and you might remember approving Mariana's appointment as special ed teacher. When was it? This summer.
Yes, May.
So welcome to the meeting.
Hello, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
And Jake Toloski, Rick has met Jake, but because Jake came in near the end of negotiations. He is our new labor relations specialist, replacing Hollis Palmer, who was working with us for about 4 years. And Jake's here tonight to talk about the CSEA information that we'll bring up and answer any questions.
Great.
So thanks for being here, Jake.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess I could introduce Sarah too. Sarah's our CSE chairperson, but I think everybody probably knows her.
Thank you all for coming. With the time change, it just seems so much later. I'm ready for bed right now. First item before we get to the reports is the consent agenda. We have the minutes, 5.01 minutes, 6.01 winter coaching assignments, 7.01 external audit report approval, 7.02 certification of lead evaluators, 7.05 donation acceptance, 7.06 special education. Does anybody wish to have any of those items removed for further discussion? Good. So is there a motion to accept the consent agenda items?
Yes.
Thanks, Dan. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Joan. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Abstentions. Motion carries 6-4-0 against. We'll skip for the good of the cause, and we'll go right into the reports. Sarah is here to give us our annual overview. And I'll just say before you start, I know this is part of the job, but I really, we all really appreciate, you know, the time that you spend on getting it ready and presenting it to us in such a clear way, understandable way.
Sorry. Sorry, Mary.
That's all right. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate your interest in it. And hopefully that won't happen again, because that's my phone I left in the other room on purpose just so that wouldn't happen. Everything's linked though. So thank you for having me tonight. If you have questions as I go through, please just ask. Feel free at the end if you have other questions, ask those as well. We have annually now for the past couple of years had this report just as a way of looking at special ed and an overview of special ed education each year. So our population overview at Lake Placid, you can see 79% of our students are in the general education setting. 16% of our students are students with disabilities, and then 5% of the students in our buildings have 504 plans. Our instructional staff, K through 12, you can see that it changed slightly from last year to this year. Some of that change was in the summer when we met and we talked about the additional need for one-to-one teaching assistants, and so you can see that the chart has shifted slightly because of those two additional, and we're so small that 2 makes quite a bit of difference in those percentages when you look at that. So that is where that shift has occurred. And hopefully as we go forward, I mean, we never know what needs will arise, but right now we're doing pretty well with where we're at. You'll also see that this chart has changed from 16-17 to 17-18. What this shows is our overall percentages of the students that have IEPs or 504s in the district. 62% of those students are at the middle high school level. 28% are at the elementary. We have 7% at the preschool level, and we have 3% that are ungraded. So we do have a small population of students that fall under what we call New York State alternate assessments, and those students are considered ungraded. And those are students that may stay until the age of 21, depending upon their needs and where they're at. So what happened is our 5th grade group that moved up to 6th grade was a pretty large group for students that have needs. And so when that group changed last year, that's what's made that shift from the 54% to the 62% of the middle high school. When we talk about special education services and when you receive information from me, you have different services listed on those board documents. And so some of those services I'm just going to go over really briefly. Consultant teacher services are services that happen within the classroom setting. Some of them, if it's called indirect, that is a consultation outside of the classroom setting with the general education teacher and the special education teacher. But when it's a direct service, that means the special education teacher is going into the classroom and designing instruction within the classroom setting for students. And that you will see on the next slide that that's quite a bit of where our services fall is in the consultant teacher services. There's also resource room services. This is when small groups, the groups have to be 5 or smaller, of students receive instruction and skills that they need to improve on. And then related services, under related services, this is where counseling and speech and OT and PT falls under our related services section. We have some of those services occur in the general education setting, some of those services occur outside of the general education setting, depending on the student's needs. Integrated co-teaching services has the star next to it because that's the one service that does not have to be on the continuum. All the rest, the state says you have to be able to provide those services. Integrated co-teaching is a service that we do provide. Specifically, right now we have that at 7th and 7th grade English. The general education teacher and the special education teacher work closely together, plan lessons, co-grade. And then we have some other, at different levels, there are some other co-teaching services going on, but 7th grade is kind of where most of those students in 7th grade English are having a co-teaching service. 15-to-1 or special class services, or it's 12-to-1 special class, are for students that need instruction differentiated even more and need to be outside of the regular education setting. Our numbers in those classes are getting smaller and smaller because we are becoming more inclusive, but we do still need those classes for some students. And then as you go down the list, the 12-to-1-to-1, we actually, that is a class where there's 12 students, 1 teacher and 1 TA. We don't currently have that classroom here in our district because there's not a need for that classroom. And then 8-to-1-to-1, we do have 8-to-1-to-1 at the elementary and at the middle high school, and that's up to 8 students, 1 teacher, 1 teaching assistant. And these are for students who their management needs are determined to be intensive and need that small of a setting to be successful here at school. And then 6-to-1-to-1, we do not currently have in our district, but those are even more intensive management needs. And then a 12-to-1, 3-to-1, we currently do not have right now either, just because we are a small district, but those students would be students that have severe multiple disabilities, and that would be 12 students to 1 teacher, and for every 3 students there's a teaching assistant too with them. And so those are the possibilities of the continuum. We don't hit all of those possibilities because we're a small district and we don't have all of those needs right now. But at any time we could, when we see the needs arise, have to shift to having different classrooms within the continuum.
Does the state allow for if my IEP says that I'm a 8-to-1-to-1, can I be in the 6 1-to-1 classroom if we don't have an 8-to-1-to-1?
No, you can't mix services within classrooms. But we carefully consider and look at what classroom would be the best classroom for that student. And when you look at those needs, right now our 8 to 1 classrooms fit most of the intensity of the needs that we have right now. It would be hard, we would really have to think about if a student we thought needed a 6 to 1 because there's not a huge difference there between the 8 to 1 and the 6 to 1. So we would consider it carefully.
Thank you.
So saying all of that, this is where our placements fall. Students are listed here in multiple levels. So they may have consultant teacher, but they may also have resource room. So you can't look at this and think that one student falls in each category. They may be in different categories of services here. We have some students that have speech therapy and they have consultant teacher services, or they have speech therapy and they have resource room. But you'll see a lot of our students have a consultant teacher service. This is our disability classification breakdown. Most of our students fall under a learning disability classification. New York State, there are 13 classifications to choose from. And so these are the 13. Most of our students fall under a learning disability classification. You will see that autism spectrum disorders, that classification has increased some since we've started looking at numbers. So has an emotional disturbance. Our classification for emotional disturbance has increased some as well. And we're just seeing that with some of the needs that we're seeing. And as we look at staffing and things, you can see some of those classifications have also increased. And any questions about that? Some great news was when Roger and I were looking at this, we were looking at this slide in particular and just looking at, we have been talking about having students be in the general ed setting as much as possible. Research shows that that's the place where they're learning the most. They have their peers that they hear, they see good modeling of thoughts and ideas, and so being in those classrooms is really important. And so you can see that our trend is increasing. So currently, in the gen ed setting, 80% or more, we have almost 80 students that are in the general education setting, 80% or more of their day. And then 40%, 79% is the green bar, which is less than 20 students that are in that category. And then the less than 40% is, I would say that's 10 or less, if I had to look at the numbers right now. And that includes our students that are at BOCES. And so if they're in a BOCES program, that is considered an all-day setting. So those are students that are in special education 100% of the time. So when you think about they're in the general education 40% or less, those would be some of our students in the BOCES setting as well.
So I just wanted to add in here, I think on our next meeting, we're scheduled to do a presentation on the opportunity gap, on how we can address the opportunity gap. And even though this is really about special ed, this particular approach, which is greater inclusion, is also very, very important as far as, addressing the opportunity gaps. Just to recognize that they cross over in big ways.
So then I wanted to look at, I knew we were growing within our district, but I also wanted to look at districts around us and look at some of their numbers. So this information comes off the state ed, the data website for state ed and the state report cards. And I just took information from some of the surrounding districts. And you can see when you look at 80% or more in regular education, we're only second to Tupper Lake in the area for having the number of students that we have. And that goes by percentage. When the state looks at it, they're looking at percentages. So these bars are percentages of students compared to our overall population. So I think that's great news. I think that shows that we're moving in the right direction and that students are having more access to regular education setting. And then when we come to the end of the year, we always look at our diploma and our credential recipients. So of the students that received diplomas or credentials. 84% of those students were general education students. 14% were students with disabilities, and 2% were students with 504 plans.
Sarah, can you go back and compare, I mean, is it logical to assume you can go back and compare that to the first pie chart you showed us when you started in terms of the percentages? So there's a pretty good correlation between the two. Is that what I'm saying?
Between 14, 15, and 16, 17, is that what you're looking at?
No, but when you first started, you started with some pie charts that showed the percentage of the population in the different groups.
Yes.
Very similar to this,
Yes.
but the numbers are slightly different here,
Mhm.
indicating some of them didn't, get a certification or something. But it's a very small number.
It's a very small number. Let me see. If I go back, I know what you're saying. If we look at
Yeah, I think it's like
this
sorry,
one,
the
right?
21st
So,
slide, yeah.
so at that point, we were looking at 79% of the population in general education overview. So it's not exact because of this is our whole overview compared to just that senior class, but it's close. And all of the students that started their senior year ended their senior year receiving, actually all of them last year received the diploma. We didn't have any that received credentials. They all received diplomas, and we actually had a student that the year before came back and took a Regents in June and received her diploma. She had left with a credential and came back and received her Regents in June. So that was great.
So all of the special ed students this year graduated with a Regents diploma?
With a local or a Regents diploma. And sometimes we have them leave with a credential, but last year, the way it worked is that they all left either with a local or a Regents diploma, which was great. They worked really hard.
Yeah.
So when I was building this, each year, sometimes Roger says, can you, focus or add something to the overall presentation? And so we talked about non-public elementary and secondary school students with disabilities. Lake Placid is unique in some ways in that we have quite a few non-public schools within our district. And so I do meet with different people from those schools. They have different representatives that I meet with, and we talk about how we're going to serve students with disabilities. Right now, we have 2 students that are school age that are in a parentally placed non-public school in our district. And so that number has decreased, but I think that, it went from 5 to 2. It's not a big decrease. There's just not a lot of students there with disabilities. But what we do is when I meet with those representatives, we talk about, do you have anyone that you think may have needs? If you do, we are required to provide an evaluation. If they think that they have needs and they refer them to the Committee on Special Education, it is our responsibility to provide an evaluation. And so both Mel Frazier and Dr. Miller do complete evaluations for our privately placed students that are within the district. And then if it's found that they need if they are eligible for special education services, we create what's called an IESP. It looks very similar to an IEP, but it's an individualized education service program. And what New York State says is that we have to provide services that are equitable to services that we would provide for students within our district. But what we have to do is we have to consult with those schools, and we have to talk about how those services will be provided. So we do have some related service providers that go into schools, into privately placed schools, and provide some services right there. We also have some students that are sometimes bused to our school, to the home district, our public school, to have services provided as well. But we meet with those parents annually. We still would be under the requirement to do reevaluations every 3 years, so all those requirements are still in place for us. And sometimes schools, that means that sometimes we're working with students that are out of state too as well, depending on where the family's coming from for the private placements.
So how do you you go in and on a periodic basis, I mean, we're responsible to make, as a district, to make sure that they are in compliance. How do we guarantee that
So
happens?
we write the plans together. Their teachers are at the meetings, the annual review meetings, and then so St. Agnes, for example, I go in, usually at first it's every 2 weeks, and I sit down and meet with the principal there, her and I meet, and we discuss how things are set up, and if there's needs that we need to fill, we've set up a schedule. If there's students that need services, the service providers also set up schedules with them, and that's how we look after it. And then we talk with the parents if they have any concerns. We'll have meetings and things to make sure things are going okay, and they have goals on their IEPs that have to be tracked, and so we watch the data for those goals to make sure that they're making progress there too. I also meet with someone from Northwood and North Country. We have a contact there too that we meet. It does overlap a little bit because of the UPK program being at St. Agnes, so sometimes I can go and check on students that are also in the UPK program while I'm there, so it works nicely. And then the last slide is just about students instructed at home. So currently, we have one student that's being instructed at home that falls under the CSE. The responsibilities for us as a CSE is to complete initial and reevaluations. It's very similar to privately placed students. Complete initial and reevaluations, hold an annual review, create and update an IESP, and I asked for some guidance on that because usually when we create those, we have the data that we've been using. But what they said is that the parents have to submit reports on how the student's progressing and annual achievement testing, and so you take that information and that becomes what you're making the plan with. And that we do need to ensure that special education services are provided to the homeschool student on an equitable basis compared to the programs that we have in the district, in the public school here. So one of the things I found interesting as I was looking at that is the Board of Ed actually determines the location of where those services occur. And so they did say in that document that the services could be in the home district in the school building. So that was an interesting little note at the bottom of the regulations I was reading.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry. When you were talking about with school age kids, though, non-school age kids with the county and where the county plays a part, is there any data to support that, or?
I don't have the data in here. We could look it up. We do have, so what Marianne is referring to is when it's a preschool student that's identified, because the Committee of Special Education operates for students ages 3 through the age 21. So when it's a preschool student that's identified with a need, we coordinate with the county. So we coordinate with Essex service providers at that level. And so we coordinate together there at our meetings. We talk with those parents and then we set up how those services happen. Some of those services occur right in our universal pre-K program. Sometimes those services occur in the home. Sometimes those services occur in right. Any questions? If you do or you think of any, just let me know. I'm always happy to come. If you need things, please
Just,
let me know.
We usually post this report somewhere. Do you, or maybe Karen, you would be the best source of this. Where would this report be posted so anyone could take a look at it?
Can it, right now it's an executive content. Can it be public?
Yeah, it could be public content under the board doc.
I think we usually put it on the, do we put it on the website, do you know?
I don't think, well,
Yeah.
because I don't have a lot of access to the website, but Joe could probably
Yeah.
help us get it onto the website so that families could see it. It could be a link under the special education page.
But it would be appropriate to put it on the website like that.
Yeah, I mean, we make sure that it's information that everybody can know and public information about what's going on.
Just want to say this is a lot of number crunching. It's not quite as hard as I think the first time you did it, Sarah. I remember that one too. But the data that comes out of, that we have to rely on for special ed comes from many different sources and is sometimes a little bit confusing and complex.
It is,
Yeah.
and sometimes you're looking at your data and sometimes New York State's looking at different data. And so it's just making sure that all of that aligns and it makes sense. And so, but I do appreciate that you want to hear about it and that you care about what's going on with our students. And I appreciate that. I think we all do.
We appreciate taking the time to do this, Sarah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen, do you want this?
Yes, please. You're the best. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Anything else for Sarah?
I don't think so. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, yeah.
No, you're welcome to stay. We
It's
understand.
too little.
We
Yeah.
understand.
Thank you so much. I'll see you.
Yeah, they're
Good, soon.
All right, so we'll move on with the agenda to the CSEA hiring process. And I know there were some questions that are arising and prepared a report.
Right, and so I'm going to start by discussing the one-page pieces that we provided to you on board docs. I will say that this very brief summary actually required a whole lot of work, and the people who did most of that work are right here, Jake and Karen. Civil service is organized county by county, and so what is standard practice in one county might not be standard practice in another county. So, for example, just in our region, when I go to regional meetings, and people start talking about civil service, we have to know whether we're talking about the county office that is in, I think it's in Malone, or the county office that's in Elizabethtown, because those two county offices operate very differently. And so, in many ways, we are working under a different set of rules just by virtue of being in a different county, even though in all other respects we're the same. So if you want to take a look at this, the way this is broken down is three areas. When we hire someone through civil service, we're hiring one of these three areas. And probably the key term there is going to be competitive. So when you see the word competitive, that means that there is a separate civil service exam that's required for one of those positions. So the middle column, the competitive column, is going to be different than the non-competitive column. And the labor class column, I'm going to say, is a lot like the non-competitive column, but it is a different classification. So in terms of, if we just want to go to the competitive column for a second, because that's probably the most complex, complicated, or maybe difficult to work with at times. You're going to see that in the top of the, one of those top rows, we listed for you just those positions in our Civil Service Employees Association that are in fact competitive. So that's typist, custodian, and head custodian. So just to contrast it, if you look over at non-competitive, our nurse is non-competitive, our cook, our auto mechanic, our head bus driver, our school bus driver, and then over labor class, also non-competitive, our cleaners, food service helpers. And just to make it a little bit more confusing, custodian, which is competitive, and cleaner, which is labor class, are essentially the same job, and they have different titles and different classifications. However, we have employees who have been hired as one and then later change title to another. Salaries are the same. So in the minds of the employee, it often is, there's really very little distinction. So the competitive ones that we're talking about that are typist, custodian, and head custodian. So what does that mean? It means that there's a test that people take. And county by county, people who take those exams, their name goes on a list. And so then the question becomes, are the lists accurate or I'm going to say timely, valid date-wise, right? So if the lists are valid, that means the tests have been given within a certain period of time. And then according to the rules, we need to consider who's on the list, right? So the way this would work in practice is that if a current list exists, then our requirement would not be to hire somebody off the list, but it would be to invite people who are on the list to apply, and then they could decide whether or not they want to apply. So sometimes there is a current list, and sometimes there is not a current list. And when there's not a current list, then we would hire, in the standard practice based on who applies, and we wouldn't be considering the list because it would not be a current list.
But we're not required to hire somebody off the list.
We're never required to hire somebody. We are required to consider people on the list.
Right,
But I'm gonna ask Jake to be a little bit more specific in a minute about that.
okay.
Okay, because there are some ins and outs in here. There are some other things here in terms of non-competitive, right? So you can read here, the county civil service office must approve your applicants to ensure that they meet the minimum qualifications. Minimum qualifications are pretty minimum. We have at times done that, in the right process, and at times we have done that after the fact. And so, we are looking at our practices right now, and we're trying to make sure that we're on top of things. It hasn't really made a difference, so we are. That's one of the areas that we're planning to tweak. In terms of the list, we in the competitive side, that's the area where we have kind of reevaluated what our practice needs to be, and to get more clarity through the county office of when there's a current list and when there isn't a current list, and then follow those responsibilities based on that. In most cases, though, we have not been working with current lists or up-to-date lists or accurate lists. So that's kind of where we've been in a number of cases. So then there's a whole bunch of other things in here. I will probably ask Jake to go into this a little bit more, but there's different classifications of hiring, whether it's probationary or provisional. And this often has to do with whether somebody is being hired with consideration of the list, or whether there's no list to consider, right? So if there's a list to consider and we hire somebody, then we make a probationary appointment, very similar to when we hire a teacher or a teaching assistant. If there's no list, then we can still hire, we make a provisional appointment, and then we go from there with what follows with that. I'm sort of hesitant to read to you the page any more than that. But thanks to Jake and to Karen, we see some areas here where we have taken some shortcuts, but essentially we have been working in the Essex County system, in which that's really been kind of the standard operating procedure. Probably the number one thing we're looking to change is to be more on top of the determination of whether the lists are current or whether they are not. Because we always do follow up afterwards and make sure that our competitive employees, when they're hired in a competitive area, are then following up with the exams. Because when they are hired off the list and they haven't taken the exam and the list isn't current, then their responsibility is, and our responsibility is, to make sure that they do go and qualify for these positions based on taking the exams. So there's a number of different routes. Some of them kind of in, I guess, what you would think is the normal order, and some is sort of either in reverse order or at least after the fact kind of order. So now that I've confused you thoroughly, I would welcome your questions, and I'm going to ask Jake to respond to them because he knows this pretty well.
So a person that's hired, that's not taken the test, they're hired with a provisional appointment based on
successful completion of
completion of the test. Okay.
Do they get more than one chance?
To pass, it passes.
That is dependent upon the number of individuals who take. So a test can be given and the list can immediately be invalid based on the results of the exam. So under that circumstance, they could maintain their provisional appointment and take the next available test again. So say 20 people take a test and the person that you've hired provisionally fails. But all of those 20 people are provisional. All those 20 people on the list are provisional already. So they take their jobs at wherever they're working provisionally. And now the list becomes invalid because nobody's on it. So you can maintain your provisional person until the next test is given. So that depends on whether the list is valid or not at the conclusion of the exam.
Can I ask you to talk about part-time versus full-time?
Right. So as Roger was saying at the beginning, every county, and this is all on their website, and I just keep these with me, every county has their own set of rules. And these are the two booklets that Essex County provides, and they're available right on their website. So when an individual is part-time, Essex County oftentimes puts, even though it may be a competitive title, when they become a part-time employee, they are moved to a non-competitive position because the county believes that that is more convenient for, it's the people that represent the school districts, prisons, all the public sector employees who work within that county. So that, and I guess just to kind of back up even further, that's the entire premise of having civil service done county by county, because the state feels that each county can be more responsive to the public sector employees within that county versus the state making a one-size-fits-all rule that may work fine in New York City but terrible in Plattsburgh. So that's why each county is very, very different in regards to how it creates the rules. So, for example, in Essex County, I would say 90% of your part-time titles are non-competitive, meaning they're not required to take a test. And they, for whatever reason, they believe that best suits their constituents.
So if they're a bus driver / custodian, they're part-time?
So when you do dual titles, the short answer is yes, because they're working part-time as a bus driver and part-time as a custodian. That the dual title in and of itself generally doesn't exist in the county setting. So they actually are holding two titles, a part-time bus driver and a part-time custodian.
Thank you.
Was there a county determination on the position created that started this question?
You mean the part-time AD secretary?
Correct. Did the county make a determination on where that falls?
Yeah, non-competitive, right? So the part-time, we talked about the
Right.
part-time.
So the actual
typist,
title of that job is not secretary to the athletic director. It would be an account clerk or a typist or whatever actual county title you would like. And because that's a part-time title, it's already classified as non-competitive.
Okay. And then the people that we have they, I don't know if we have to switch what we're doing to find out if they've taken the test. So that's my other question.
What do you mean by switch?
If it's something that can be answered in open
Yeah, I don't know.
meeting, or if we need to switch to executive
I think
session.
I think we would probably need to do that, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I don't need it this minute if
Yeah.
there's other stuff that's gonna come up throughout the meeting, but I would like to get that answer.
Sure.
So,
Other questions?
Do we want to go into executive session right now and answer that question?
Are you gonna do, we even have the answers to the questions?
Am I in an executive session?
I'm looking at you because you're the one with all the answers. I don't even know that we're prepared to answer those questions right now.
so we can
I
do
do
that
know
next
one.
meeting.
Yeah, so maybe that'll be another meeting. Yeah. You wouldn't.
Did you just write
No,
that?
well, I'm happy to chat with you in advance.
Wow. It's pretty noisy over there.
Talk about making an entrance.
Wow.
So, and I'll just, one more quick thing about lists, because I know lists are the problem that everybody has. Not just you, everybody in every county, nobody likes lists. So there's a lot of things you can do to invalidate a list or exhaust a list if you believe that, maybe the people on the list aren't the candidates that best fit your school district, or you've had someone here part-time who you're trying to make full-time. Those types of things where a list comes into play. Essex County, for example, and I put a little asterisk on your sheet, allows you to restrict the list based on residency, meaning based on your school district. So if you want to immediately shrink your list to people who live in your school district, you can do that. If you want to send out canvas letters and get with a return by date and people don't return them, that happens all the time, that shrinks your list. While the list seems like an obstacle, there are so many, I don't want to call them loopholes because they're intentional loopholes, which is kind of an oxymoron, but there are several ways that the county has put in place to exhaust the list, because while they understand that it is important to use these tests and lists, they also understand that, especially in smaller counties like we have here in the North Country, it's also important to give the employer flexibility, because whereas Schenectady School District that I work for is going to hire 50 people to do human resources, you may only be hiring one, and you know who you want. So that's kind of, so there is a lot of moving parts and a lot of nuances, and that's why people like me have jobs, is to understand those and be able to explain them if people have questions.
So if the part-time typist title automatically moves it into the non-competitive,
For a part-time status, yep.
so then the other question would be, and again, it can be at the next meeting, because it says under the non-competitive that the county approves the applicant to ensure they meet the minimum, so that's my other question. If that
Can you talk
happens.
about that? What does that mean?
Minimum qualifications?
Yeah, because that's a
So-
good question.
On the county website, they have every title that exists in Essex County. So and then they have what's called a job description. You click on the title, click on the job description. At the very end of the job description, it is going to state what a candidate must have in order to qualify to hold that title. So what you generally do is make sure that you send that person's resume to the county, and the county approves it and says, yes, this person meets the minimum qualifications for that title, or they don't. RN is a perfect example. You have to submit that person's nursing license to the county if you're going to hire someone as a nurse, because they want to make sure that that the person holding that title is duly qualified, certified, has the appropriate licenses, experiences, whatever the case may be. Same thing with bus driving. They need the CDL with the B designation.
For
So-
a position like cleaner, what would be minimum qualifications? Just as an example, I know.
Right. Generally speaking, your labor class have minimum, because your labor class are really considered your entry level. So a position like a cleaner may not even require a high school diploma. It just may require, 1 year of job experience or something like that. A very low threshold. Whereas when you get to head custodian, they often require that you have a certain amount of service in a lower custodian-like title, whether it's 5 years of service as a cleaner and a high school diploma or equivalency, or 3 years of service as a custodian with a high school diploma or an equivalency. So they just kind of build it up.
Here's the description for a cleaner.
So see the minimum quals for a cleaner, there are
Not
none.
required.
So that would be another question for the next one.
What would that be?
That if that resume of the applicant went to the county for approval for the part-time position that's non-competitive. Or the resume, yeah.
Mhm.
That's,
what would be the minimum qualifications for a part-time typist?
If you wanted, or did you close it out? So a typist, actually, it's probably in here. And they're not in here. Oh, there you go, yeah, right there. So you, and it might even be, if it's not there, T, it might be under A, sometimes they call them account clerk typist, so it depends on the county.
There it is.
There you go, so typist. So there you go. So high school diploma or equivalency with some type of typing designation or 2 years of clerical experience, including typing, or some type, and C is the favorite one that everybody uses because it's like, let me call the county and this person's really smart and I promise they are and let us hire them. They somehow mesh together. So that's how it works. And oftentimes formal education will, for example, so say this person had no typing designation and had no experience, but has a bachelor's degree, they're gonna, or even an associate's degree, they will allow formal education to substitute for experience.
And so when I say sometimes I use the term, maybe I shouldn't use that term on national television here, but shortcuts. So we generally are looking to hire the most qualified person. So that's usually what we're looking for. We're also pretty aware of what the minimum would be, and we usually have people who are at or above the minimum. We have been sending information in after, that's what I mean by the after the fact kind of thing, when we're confident that these situations are strong.
Right, and that isn't always, that isn't always an unacceptable thing too, because the county is dealing with, I don't know how many public sector employers there are in Essex County, but there are several. And sometimes, you have a last minute vacancy or you need somebody to start work ASAP, you could send the stuff into the county and that you might not hear back for some time. So, and you need somebody in that position because you need the work. So, well, yes, it's obviously always best practice to work from point A to point C. Sometimes you start out at point B and A follows, but that's just the nature of the game when you're working with the government.
Can it work like the provisional appointment? Can you do it? Could you do a provisional appointment?
So for the part-time,
based on approval from the county?
so for the part-time people, there is no provisional appointment because they're non-competitive. So they just enter their probationary period immediately. If the county doesn't approve them for the minimum qualifications, they have no, what the legal term is property interest, they have no property interest in their job because the county deems them unqualified. So then they are just by operation of law terminated without a leg to stand on, so to speak. But so yeah, so you don't have to worry about them gaining any edge by getting to work sooner.
Any other questions for Jake?
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah,
so
no
much.
problem.
you.
Absolutely, anytime.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, be careful driving home.
Oh, absolutely.
Thanks for all your help.
Yes, that's what we're here for. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
You too, Simon.
you.
Thank you.
So the next meeting, we will have an executive session to answer those two questions. The civil service tests, are they up to date with our employees, and the minimum qualification is that approved by the county civil service office? Is that correct? Two questions.
Yeah, the two type this.
So our next meeting is December, right, 5 in Wilmington, which we're doing our safety hearing first, which I've already noticed at
We could,
6:30.
this, I don't think will take a long time. We could do this at the end.
Okay, that's why I just want to make sure. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. All right, policy, we'll move on. Main policy committee report. Are there any questions or anything, any addition to the report that's here? We need to go through it. If not, let's go to the policy first read. 5460, child abuse, maltreatment, or neglect in a domestic setting. A revision at the end. Talk about that.
I'll mention a couple of things. So you can see from the policy report that we did discuss a number of different policies in our most recent policy committee meeting. But we did only make changes to this one. That's why you're only seeing one. We've been talking about more than one. This one, the changes to the child abuse, maltreatment, or neglect in a domestic setting policy is a reflection of, mostly a reflection of the change in the law. And at the very end, you see the addition, as required by state law and regulation, the district shall publicize the toll-free number for reporting child abuse in both English and Spanish in that way. We did make another change, that was the crossing off portion of the attendance at sessions and training program should require of all school officials. I think we were just reflecting how our ongoing training works.
And it was more, that's more of a, how it's implemented, not really policy, so we try to remove details out of policy when it's appropriate, and that was an area that we felt was getting a little too detailed.
Right. We do review and revisit this issue often at the schools with practitioners, teachers, teaching assistants, and others. But on top of that, everybody who obtains a license in New York State has to take a course in child abuse and neglect reporting. And everybody understands it's a serious responsibility that they're mandated reporters. This is not, sometimes in policies we are dealing with maybe more technical details that aren't always in the forefront of people's minds. This one's in the forefront of people's minds. And it's unfortunately carried out often. And we practice this with regularity.
No, but if we can go back, so I was just sending a note to remember something about something else when we, about the policy meeting, so. No, not on this thing, but I did want to speak about the policy meeting for that faster than I was ready for.
Okay, sorry. Are there any questions about this policy?
So there was a question on there about Courtney
Oh,
that you
yes,
wanted to discuss.
thank you.
And it has to do with, it's in the administrative content.
Did you copy and paste the question? Was that not on this one, but on another one? Oh, no, it's on this one. So within the child abuse, maltreatment, or neglect in that policy, one of the changes that was, because we get the suggested policy, the sample policy from NISBA, and then we merge it, Karen merges it, Karen merges it with the one that's existing. And somehow when this sample came out, instead of having a summary of this policy included in the handbook, it says, in addition, this policy and regulation will be included in all employee handbooks. And so we sent that out to try to find out if that was something that had changed. And so a note went to Courtney, who is at NISBA, who several of you are familiar with, to see if that was required or if that is just their opinion. And it seemed to be more that they think that's a good idea. It didn't come back as that it's required. So where in this, we should switch that so that it says, well, I mean, that's can be discussed, sorry, but that a summary would be included in the employee handbook. The employee handbook, when they get them, they also have an area where they say they've reviewed the policies of the district, correct?
What do you mean? It's an area that, could you say?
That with the employees, they have to say that they reviewed the policies.
Yeah.
Because including the full, I think this may, instead of, there are a lot of areas that there's a summary of the policy and then it directs them where to go to read the complete policy. And if we're including the full policy and full regulation on things referenced within a handbook, the handbook's gonna get very big very fast. So it has been through and standard that a summary is included. It happens with the handbook for the students in certain areas that there's a plain language summary and then it's referenced so people could always go to the policy and look it up. And so that's why this change that was recommended was questioned. And I think probably it's going to be the best idea since they did not come back saying that we had to, it's not required to include the policy and regulation, to keep it as the summary would be included. So thank you
So
for
this-
reminding me of
Oh,
that.
no problem. So this paragraph there, we're gonna put back in addition, a summary of this policy and regulation will be included.
Well, I think, yeah, but I don't even know if you wouldn't do a summary of the regulation.
So take out and regulation.
Yeah. That a summary of this policy because then it's referenced.
And the regulation could be referenced to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, as soon as they go to the policy, then the regulation is
Right.
referenced right below it. So, I just think there are a lot of areas that municipal policy thinks it's a good idea to include things.
Right.
But it's a lot of information. So that's that. Thank you, Karen.
And then, so are there any other questions about this policy?
So we're gonna make that addition and then for second read, it'll be in there?
Yes.
We're gonna take it out. We're gonna put in addition, a summary and take out and regulation.
So we.
It's not even putting it in, it's
Keeping it the same.
keeping it the same.
A summary of will stay in.
Yes, which will keep it the same as the policy that we have
And
now.
then and regulation will be taken.
So that
And so we're not,
will be, so it will be a little bit different. The first read, the second read will be a little bit different. And you just wanna know that before you.
and, but this sentence is consistent with how this policy has been written
Right.
for years. Or in practice.
in practice.
Right, so then we can go back to the report.
Yes, so, and I just noticed this now, we forgot to include who attended. And so Joni attended, it was her first policy meeting with us, which was awesome, that she came out and she figured out how I could get the monitor to not be black, and that was huge. So the other thing, just to note is, within here, there was, a policy that was reviewed, the curriculum management, so it says that it's not a policy in our district. And the reason is not that the area is not addressed, it's just addressed on the website for each individual school. And so the overarching policy would not be helpful. And so it's just, the information gets out to people just in a different way, and is looked at and updated more currently than policies often are. And the other thing is, and we just got the NISBA update for the policies to be reviewed in January. So they had suggested we review and gave suggested language for the smoking policy, which to include e-cigarettes because that's now a thing in your state. And our policy had already included it, so we didn't have to take their language because we already put it in before they suggested it. And now their newest update added that we would need to change that in the code of conduct, which we had done when we put it in the first place. So policy was a little bit daunting when we came on, and Mary, Rick, and I had a meeting and like, sure, yeah, we're gonna do this. But it's actually the formats that we have. It's pretty user friendly now, and the district seems to be it's working, and people are finding things, and we have the information that actually is relevant to our kids and our practices. So it was nice to see that we were a little bit ahead. Yeah, and I think that was nice. So.
Thank you. Sure. We'll move on to the superintendent's report.
Okay. Well, I want to talk about just a couple of things tonight, and I'm going to start with athletics, because we've had a lot of athletic successes this fall. And now the fall sports season is winding down, so I thought it'd be a good idea to highlight some of those successes and talk about our athletic program in general. So some of our successes. In cross country, our boys team won its third sectional championship in a row. And we've now qualified for the New York State meet. And that's this weekend outside of Rochester. We'll have our entire boys team and two of our girls will also be competing. You can either qualify as a team or you qualify individually. So two of our girls qualify individually. So that's very exciting. It's the third year in a row again that our boys have gone as a team to the state meet. So congratulations to our boys and the best of luck to them on Saturday. And so we're going to keep this running in the background. I just want to comment on it, maybe when we're done. So our boys soccer team, well, they're in the midst of a Cinderella playoff run right now. I believe their regular season record was 4-7, and they've won four in a row. They won their sixth sectional championship. Am I getting that right? Sixth sectional championship. So they've had a lot of success at the sectional level, but never have gone to the state Final Four. And this year they're going to go. So the soccer team will be advancing to the state tournament in Middletown. They're going to be competing against Byron Bergen in the state semifinals on Saturday. And should they win, on Saturday, Sunday is the final game, and that would be against whoever wins between Pearson, Bridgehampton, and Lansing. So good luck to the boys soccer team this weekend.
The team they're playing is 17-1-1.
That's just fun. Cinderella's relish that challenge. So I also want to recognize our girls volleyball team. On Saturday, they lost a very close match in 5 games for the sectional title. They had won a number of sectional titles in a row. And so they won't be moving on, but it was really a wonderful effort from a very solid girls team and their coach, Tom Booth. So we've had a lot of successes here at the end of the year, but we're running pictures of the team behind me because really every one of those kids right there in those pictures has been successful this year, whether they're at the modified level or the JV level or varsity level, when they're playing for a team that's going to the state tournament, or whether they didn't really make it out of sectional playoffs or even have playoffs because they're younger. The success of our athletic program isn't really measured in wins and losses, but in the great opportunities that it brings to our kids and the benefits it brings to all of our student athletes. So really, they all deserve congratulations, regardless of level and regardless of team. This year we had, and you're looking at pictures of 164 student athletes participating in all of our fall sports. When players join interscholastic sports, they make a huge commitment of time, a commitment of energy, and a huge emotional commitment. And I think their families make those commitments too. Our coaches, tremendous commitment, well beyond the usual sort of compensation that they get. They are highly committed to their teams. We consider interscholastic athletics extracurricular activities, but through sports, students grow and develop in ways that are central to their lives. And I think many people, if you ask that question, whether they learn central lessons through sports, would probably not. And probably said the same thing if they were involved at that level in music and the arts and those kinds of programs, drama. Studies demonstrate that in addition to the physical benefits of athletics, students learn and grow in the areas of teamwork, sportsmanship, leadership, self-discipline, and self-esteem. And also in those studies, we can tie higher grade point averages, lower dropout rates, better daily attendance, and fewer discipline problems to participation in athletics. I think that speaks really highly to the importance of these programs. So I think it's really important that we thank our players, our coaches, our families for the commitment they've made to athletics this season. And I think a thank you also to the board for your commitment to maintaining and strengthening our athletic programs, because they've really been critical in lives like this. So thank you for that.
Perfect.
So that's one thing. I also wanted to share with you some of the upcoming events for the month of November. We won't be meeting again as the board until December. I'll go through some of November with you. As usual, lots of things going on, and many of them tied to the kinds of issues that we talk about throughout the year. We talk about things like issues like bullying and school climate. Today, there was a mix-it-up at lunch day at Lake Placid Elementary School. That's the day when kids walk into the cafeteria, instead of sitting with their usual crew of people they're comfortable with, they're mixed up. They're selected in different ways, organized by students to introduce them to new kids, to find a comfort level, hopefully, with kids that they're not always spending their time with. That's one example of those kinds of programs. We have Financial Aid Night coming up tomorrow night, and that's in the Library Media Center. Financial Aid Night is a really important resource for any kid and their families who plan on going to college and trying to figure out how to pay for it. At this time right now, it's pretty critical for seniors who are making their applications and have their financial aid packages in need of getting the FAFSA done, the CSS profile done, all those kinds of forms. And so part of that meeting is actually a work session, and part of it is informational that I think would benefit anybody. Friday, we have no school for Veterans Day, but we do have our marching band that will be participating in the Veterans Day parade, as they always do, which is on Saturday. Saturday also is the state cross-country meet and the semifinal state soccer game, so that's a lot of things just going on this week. Tuesday, the 14th, is our next safety team meeting. So again, we've been talking about that. That second meeting is coming up on Tuesday. The Fall Athletic Awards ceremony is also scheduled for later that night. We've also had, of course, just a lot of things going on, college visits, play rehearsals for the fall play, and also a few fundraisers. It's the season for fundraisers in the school right now. We do have parent-teacher conferences coming up, and that's on Thursday, November 16th. You may have noticed a name change at the elementary school, and they are trying to shift the focus to school-home connection meetings. And this is a reflection of, this is coming from the work of their their team trying to develop an initiative that addresses the opportunity gap. They have a long list of things we're doing, and one of those things is trying to build more of a level of comfort in to our parent conferences, and that name change is a part of that. Friday and Saturday of next week, we have a big event happening right here. We are going to be hosting the Ariel All-State Music Festival. So that rotates around to different school districts, and this year it's our turn. So that's a Friday and Saturday event. Friday is all rehearsal, but Saturday is, concludes with a wonderful concert. So we're bringing together, you know, all of the best musicians in the region, and they all perform 3 o'clock on Saturday, the 18th. So if you want to hear a great concert and to see what students can do around here, Saturday, the 18th at 3 p.m. The performance, though, will be in the convention center. So we're using both facilities, thanks to ORDA and their support for our school and the kinds of things we like to do. And then on Tuesday the 21st, just as we get close to Thanksgiving holiday, we're going to be having our early release drill. This has been kind of standard practice, and it plays into our safety plan that we've also been talking about. And after that, of course, our students, our staff, our families are looking towards Thanksgiving, celebrating the holiday. School will be off for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then back in session that Monday. So if I don't see you between now and then, because we don't have a board meeting scheduled for then, happy Veterans Day, happy Thanksgiving, and look forward to seeing you in December. And that's everything I have.
Thank you, great, thank you. Move on, information for the board. There's quite a bit there. We'll do the easy stuff first, the Adirondack Center enrollment. If anybody has questions on any of these, that is the timeline for the budget vote, and then our own local budget calendar. So I would suggest you take a look at that, and if you have any questions about it, then you can ask them now, Patty, or
Yeah, I just, but I didn't see in the Adirondack Educational Center, is that the BOCES program?
Yes,
So I didn't see Mr. Whistler's unless he's retitled it.
he did.
What is
Well,
it
no,
called now?
I'm sorry. They're used. Look like they good catch. Wait, let me just make sure. Yeah, the Adirondack Center. They're still using the old title there, right? So they're using the old name, which
Oh.
is conservation.
Oh,
The
okay,
new title that maybe you're more familiar with is Natural Resources Science.
science, yeah. All right, great,
Yeah.
thanks.
are there any questions on any of those? Take a look at the budget, our budget calendar, and if you see some conflicts, next week, next meeting would be the time to voice those. The other areas, we have two items that are linked, the bus lease memo and the bus lease info. And I'm gonna ask Leonard and Roger to kind of maybe add to the information there.
So,
I'll start then.
you want me to start?
Go ahead.
So, the first one is let's see, the bus memo, and it's got the background and justification on there. This is just a preliminary justification why I believe the school district needs this 30-passenger bus. It is authorized by the state of New York. What we can do is lease that for a 1-year term, and then during the budget vote, we would add this for next year on with our existing fleet, our lease fleet. And if it's approved, then we would do the subsequent 4 years on that particular bus.
Reasoning behind a 30-passenger bus versus maybe a smaller 18 or something. Just seems like a big jump from a Suburban to a 30-passenger bus.
So we're not proposing here to replace the Suburban. Where this all came from, just so you know, is we've been having some challenges with the bus run to Plattsburgh with at times, depending on issues around students and bus monitors needing more space. And so we've only been able to either go with the Suburban or with the 66 passenger bus. At times, the 66 passenger bus has been the choice because of the need for more space. In addition, the Suburban itself has been used excessively over the last number of years now that we've been doing it. We just bought the Suburban and it's about 100,000 miles.
Yeah, there's 100,000
Yeah.
already.
So we see that we're really running that vehicle hard. We also see that there are times, and sometimes more often than others, that we need more space. So what we were looking for was something that would address that particular problem, but then also be useful as a benefit for other things that we're looking for. So why a 30 passenger bus? So a 30 passenger bus, the numbers, 60, let's go to 66 passenger bus. You really don't get 66 high school kids on a 66 passenger bus, right? You get 40 something on there, right? Because they're counting 3 kids to a seat. You could squeeze the kids in a seat, but basically you would want 2 people to a seat. So a 30 passenger bus has 10 seats, right? And so if you have 2 on a seat, you can really comfortably sit 20. So what we see in the 30 passenger bus, if we were to, if that would be something that we were to approve, the board were to approve, we would be able to make use of that during the day on that run to Plattsburgh when needed, but also make use of it for teams and field trips that have more than a handful,
Right.
but not an entire large group of students. We do have so we were kind of making an evaluation, what size would be the most useful. We started with the smaller 22, I think it is, and we knew we would miss out on, we would not be able to serve a number of teams that way, and field trips that way. But when we went up to the 30, we were able to encompass a lot more. The 30 is a smaller bus, obviously. It's more efficient, but it would also give us a different option on some of the trips that we take. We're sending off a big bus with often a small group of people. So we saw this as a way to give us another option there, while also really addressing the problem with the CVES. Did I hit that right, Leonard?
Yeah.
The reality is that the Suburban is running down, and the reality is also that at times it's too tight inside that vehicle. That's the problem. The other is trying to provide alternatives that are beneficial.
The next bit of information there shows the sales quotation and the actual bus itself, the options, and some of those options are required by the state, and then at that very last page it shows, I thought I highlighted it pretty good there, but it doesn't show up very well on the print here, but it's the annual estimated lease payment would be $9,113 a year. The total purchase price, if we had to buy it out front, or right up front, would be $57,965.82. So that bus is about right around half of what we pay for a 66 passenger bus. And the lease payments on the 66 average right around that $18,000 a year. So it's just about half.
Are there other questions? Right. Then, excuse me, the last documents for information for the board concern the Vader. Excuse me, the Vader data. Are there questions, or is there more information that Roger you'd like to add to this?
so why are you looking at data reports, right? The reason is that as we look through our policies, we recognize that there are some things that we just haven't done. There's a lot of detail in our policies. One of them is that the board will have a chance to review the data reports every year, and you haven't seen them. So we're trying to catch up and make up for a lapse there. That being said, there really isn't a tremendous amount of information. Well, I won't say that. You may find that there's some good information here. We find that the data reports don't usually provide us as administration with a tremendous amount of information that we can put to use. It's an annual requirement. It's something that the state wants to see, so to recognize that when schools are I guess considered to be dangerous or not. Sometimes, however, it's a matter of sometimes comparisons aren't equal. Some schools what would be considered a violent incident in one school may not be considered a violent incident in other schools. So there's always been some concern that we're comparing apples to oranges, but we're telling you, we're providing you with the information and telling you what we consider to be incidents of violence that are usually things that have to do with fights or threats. And so that's all in here. This is last year's report.
Thank you for getting it. And I mean, I think it's probably not helpful because you're familiar with all these incidents because they're happening for you all year, but I think I think it is a good thing for the board to see, just to get a.
We're happy to provide it, and if that does help provide you with more information, that's terrific. We do spend some time at the end of every school year putting this together, and it really does mean collecting more information. We're one of the benefits of our most recent student management software system, School Tool, is that it does do a lot of the collecting of this data for us, and that's been helpful this year. So it's a little bit easier and faster this year than in past years, would you say?
Does it actually produce those reports? Is that coming?
It doesn't produce the report itself, but it produces the data. Yes, we actually have to
Yeah,
enter.
we have to,
Yeah.
Is that it used when Mr. Mayberry was the
So Mr. Mayberry was here. We were using.
there was the chart with the
Very similar.
Is that what the School Tools kind of produces?
School Tool
It captures
organizes
those.
it the way that Vader asks it to be organized,
Right,
and the last system did not do that.
but does it give that similar feedback? Or is that type of information being collected somewhere else?
That type, you mean like the daily sent to the principal? that
No,
sort of
he
report?
would do, he did a report and I just remember,
Yeah.
because seasonally, like they were tracking trends and he could gather information as far as what seemed to be.
Yeah, and it was all good information.
Right,
it
and
was,
so is that,
it's just,
School Tools, does that help gather?
it
similar-
does.
Okay.
Okay, then we move on to linking goals with agenda items. And definitely the special education report is with the students first and foremost.
Yeah, I think also communication, if they do make it available on the website.
Okay, yes. I mean, it really meets one of our objectives, which was support and review special ed programs. That was our objective. Anything else?
Yeah, the CSEA review would go under finance. Because it links in with the CSEA type disposition. Objective.
Okay.
More of a question, but under leadership, it says complete and operationalize annual documents, conflict of interest, and that is all collected. So that-
Under which one?
The conflict of interest statements, because those were due November 1st.
Did everybody in there's in?
I did it the last.
I believe I have everybody's.
I did it last week.
So, that's complete.
Then, the discussion item centers on the safety plan.
I'm sorry. So they were handed in, did they get scanned into board docs?
No.
Because I think there's
Where do you want
supposed
me to put them?
So we could just include them at the next meeting and then we can link them to the goal. But they're supposed to be posted somewhere, so board docs seems like as good as any.
I can create in the library and
The library to get the best place.
Okay.
So if we go on to the discussion item, the safety plan, it's really kind of twofold. One is an update on the first committee meeting. And then there does seem to be a conflict. There's questions about the dates that are listed. You know, with our policy and compared to what state regulations are. So again, I'm going to turn this over to you to kind of lead this
To make
discussion.
sense of state
Yeah,
regulation
right.
and district policy all
Right.
coming together at once. The question came up about the dates and the required dates of submission for safety plans. And so if you look at the, I provided you with a brief snippet of what comes from different requirements. So for example, we have district policy and our district policy says that all plans should be reviewed and updated by November 15th. But our plan itself does say, really reflects the regulations because the plan is really written based on the regulations. Matter of fact, that plan was revamped last year based on the revamped state regulations. And so, you know, in order, I guess you want to look at it that way. According to our policy, the Board of Ed approves the safety plan on July 1st, but, and according to everybody, we're supposed to have a 30-day comment period that precedes approval. Also, according to everybody, we're required to file plans with both the New York State Commissioner of the Education Department, obviously, and all of our law enforcement agencies, fire and ambulance, 30 days after adoption. So, you know, you take a date like July 1st and you go 30 days before, it's June 1st, you go 30 days after, it's August 1st. Board of Ed and New York State regulation says Board of Ed approves by September 1st, which is of course a different date. It also there has been a recent change in state regulations. School plans have to be submitted online. This is new, that they're supposed to be submitted online. It just started last month. By October 15th, not only is it new to submit it online, but in the old days, we used to be able to submit it online by attaching the final document and submit it. The recent change required us to enter our plan piece by piece into an online system, which we might be able to report to you was time consuming. So the changes that occur kind of occur like this, so we try and keep up with them. Plans also are supposed to be filed with state and local police by October 15th. Well, that's off if, of course, you know, you go with that 30-day rule. And then all plans should be reviewed, and again, our district policy says November 15th. So, you know, you might be asking, well, how can we possibly follow that? And, you know, let me tell you what we do. And you can tell me if you think we're doing right by it. We work on the plan in the fall. And we work on the plan in the fall for a couple of reasons. One of them is that a lot of changes occur from the end of the previous year to the beginning of the current year. People change and situations change. And so we do schedule our revision time for the fall. Sometimes it's the end of September, sometimes it's the middle of October, start somewhere around there. And then, of course, we finish it up in time to see to be ready for our drill dates. And then sometimes we'll follow up after the drill dates and review on how those went. So it's sort of a nice time for that. The Board of Ed approves our plan after we've had the 30-day hearing or comment period. So the Board of Ed isn't approving it right now until the end of December or sometimes beginning of January. Now, you might say that that's way after the deadline of July 1st, or you might look at it in terms of, the way we've been looking at it is that it precedes it by a number of months.
That's just how I interpret it.
That-
We're a year.
So I'll leave that up to you to give us feedback on that. It has been confusing, and one of the reasons why we have not gone to the spring, you might be thinking, well, why don't we just do this all in the spring? Well, one of the big changes that occurs is the change in people. And so we know that we revise these things in the spring, they're almost out of date by the time September rolls around. But frankly, sometimes by the spring, you already feel like it's actually a tough time to spend thoughtful moments to review plans. So there's a few different reasons why we don't do it in the spring. If we did it in the spring, we would be doing it probably to make a deadline. We do it in the fall because we think that's where it's best served. We don't do it over the summer because about half the people on the team do not work in the summer. And so on occasion, we bring people in over the summer to work on things. We have not done that for the safety plan. The point about dates and things being out of sync sometimes, and the question about whether or not we're meeting all the deadlines. What we're trying to do is we're trying to do right by the safety plan and stay on top of it and be current. Whether or not we're meeting all those deadlines in the way they're intended, I can't say 100% confidence, but that's where we are.
I think I remember though, when we came up, I mean,
Came up in
the
policy
November
committee when we discussed
15th
it.
date
Yeah.
is not a recommended date. I think the recommended date, I don't even know if they provided one, but I think if they did, it might have been in the spring, where it was clear that there were too many other things going on. So in the policy, if it says review and updated, does that date work, or should we shift? I mean, it's when the other team's working on. Is that separate? Is that just to say that while the school's working on it, then the board also takes a look at it to see if they have any questions? I don't know what review and update, because
we've looked at this drill date, which is before Thanksgiving. That's the day we've chosen to do it. It's not required that we do it then. That's when we've just chosen to do it. Frankly, we've been doing it that way probably for 15 years. We've looked at that date as being kind of a key one for testing, right? Testing it. So having the period that leads up to that be the period to revisit and revise. When I talk to others, they seem to think that that's they seem to feel like it's been well timed, and so the November 15th date we think is a workable one. But you can see from the other dates that it's not necessarily
You've been doing
falling
this
into
for
place.
15 years, right?
Well, the safety plans have been changing. I mean,
and the dates have all been
they've been
changed.
changing even recently. So I won't say that these have all been in either conflict or we haven't been meeting them all that time. But we've been doing these plans for a while. I can't say 15 years because I haven't been on the safety team in this role for 15 years, but we've had plans and I've certainly been involved in developing them over the time. So that's kind of where it is.
So it's probably the word updated, which is I mean, I think there was a whole conversation about the fact that if it's looked at in the fall and then it's approved in the spring, then you've had the time to really see if it's working. For that, I mean, I think when the dates were looked at, it was being looked at like that would be that year's that would be looked at. Why it says an updated, no, reviewed and updated. I mean, it is being reviewed and updated as of November 15th.
Right.
It's just not finalized, but it doesn't say it must be finalized. It just says reviewed and updated, which is currently happening as you continue to have meetings.
Yeah. And it's not just like, for example, Jeff comes to the district-wide meeting, and we'll have that next Tuesday, but in between the two meetings, we've been having a lot of ongoing discussions and,
So once it's finalized,
tweaking things.
then it will come to the board.
Right.
Yeah.
And it just, the date approved by July 1st means that it would never go past July 1st.
That date's just way back out there.
Yeah.
It is approved by July 1st. We're actually approving
When,
it.
when we
when
approve it in
approve
December.
yeah.
But where is that? Is that, so it's the July 1st, like where did the July 1st date come from? Is that one that
I
someone
think
says?
it's set around the reorganizational meeting, because that says it's
Yeah,
a class
that's
of
in our
policy.
policy.
That's our policy, so I bet it was set based on, that's our reorganization.
But we don't do it at that.
No,
No.
Yeah.
So our policy says we review and revise it, by November 15th, but that we approve it by July 1st. Now, by is, of course, allows you some leeway, right? But,
Number 4 is approves by September 1st.
right.
So my point is,
Yeah.
or is we can change our own policy. We can't change New York State regulations, of course.
Right.
But let's make it a reality as versus just throwing dates in there. If July 1st is the reality, then that's great. But it just seems like that was out of whack with the rest of them.
So we
So,
should propose September 1st.
so the October 15th date is,
That's
so
a
if we eliminate
submission.
our policy, that's the submission
Yeah.
of the policy, of the plan that we approved by September 1st.
by July 1st. Well, that's our policy, yeah.
Yeah, so by October 15th, we might be in the middle of revising our plan.
Right.
The way we're currently practicing it, right? We are in the middle of revising it on October 15th, but we're also required to submit what we have. So we're submitting last year's plan. There was a plan that was, approved last December, in October, and then we're revising it in November, and then you're approving it in December or January.
So it's
we're
it's
6
constantly
months ahead.
changing. I mean,
Right.
I don't think, why do we have to
Yeah.
change anything? I mean,
No,
the
I
plan's,
don't
the plan's constantly under review in perpetuity, so as long as this is working, do we have to really?
And we haven't,
Change anything.
we are meeting technically, if we're approving the plan in December or January, we have approved it by September 1st the following year, but that's the plan we.
Why,
moving forward, so.
but we could certainly, does it keep changing, the New York State regulation, that September 1st date? Do you know?
I don't know.
But
So-
the
I know
October
some
date
things
is-
have changed recently.
Yeah.
I don't know if that
so-
date's.
So if that date hasn't changed, if that seems to be a date that's just there, it would make sense for our policy
I
to
think Rick's
match.
point's a good one, which is we shouldn't be putting our
policy-
policy in conflict with state regulation.
Yeah, and/or we change the policy to say, the board approves this by the date required on
Right,
the
In
New York
accordance
State,
with New York
New York
State.
State.
Yeah,
That would
Yeah,
change the
that
wording
makes
to
perfect
that and remove the date, if it's a moving target, that we have, because there's enough of a team looking at this that they're gonna keep track of those things are just not optional, you're gonna be required to do it. So that would be my,
Might be a policy committee job.
yeah, we would take it back to policy committee.
Yeah.
Yeah, we better check the date with favor next meeting, because there's a couple things coming up on what they're suggesting. So, but then again, in our policy, it says all plans reviewed and updated by, that November 1st date is also one that we just made up, so I don't know if there's a way that we take it out, or if we pick one that's more,
the November
realistic.
15th day,
Yeah,
but you said that's a reasonable date.
I think that's
that's your
a
goal,
date that does reflect what we do.
a goal of
Yeah.
the team. Okay, all right, that's fine, I just,
All right, so send it back to policy, good, and then,
will you, Carol, will you write that down?
I did.
Number, thank you.
and then, the update on the committee meeting itself, do you wanna say anything?
So we're meeting again on Tuesday, and what I'll do is I'll provide the committee with recommendations from the individual teams, the school level teams, and there's a district level team. That's kind of neat. But revision recommendation mine are based on the consultation I've done with the police, including the state police. So we'll report back on some of the recommendations from the state police that were involved, who weren't able to be involved in the the general meeting, and then look at the recommendations that are being proposed by the schools and the district, and then the full committee will, decide whether they think that's a good place to land. And then we'll look ahead at our drills and go from there.
So the state police did a review
Yeah,
as planned,
yeah,
the one individual who's out.
yeah. So our consultant, we'll call him our consultant.
Okay.
Our school liaison from the state police.
So even though it's been quiet, it
Mhm.
hasn't been dropped.
What's that?
I said even though it's been quiet, it hasn't been dropped
Right.
out there.
Right, that's right. That's what we.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we move on to action items. There's two that were not on the consent agenda. One is the bond council resolution. The proposed resolution reads, whereas Lake Placid Central School voters have approved the capital project referendum in the amount of $19,160,000. Whereas the district will need bond counsel to obtain financing for the county project. Now therefore be it resolved, the Lake Placid Central School Board of Education wishes to retain the services of Walsh and Walsh relating to the financing of the capital project, and be it further resolved, Mary Dietrich, President of the Board of Education, is directed to sign an engagement letter with Walsh and Walsh relating to the financing of the capital project. Is there a motion to approve this resolution?
Yes.
Thank you, Jeff. Is there a second?
Yes.
Is there discussion? Questions? Not, please vote. And motion carries 7-4-0 against. And then the second one is the bond resolution. Upon recommendation of the superintendent, approve the bond resolution as clearly attached. Is there a motion to approve this resolution?
Moment.
Thanks, Rick. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Stan? Is there discussion? Questions? No, let's keep vote. Motion carries 7-4-0 against. So we move into adjournment. Next meeting, as Karen said earlier, is December 5th, 6:30, and that's in Wellington at the community center. Old agenda topics, we have the CSEA hiring practice was one that was on there. We have that report tonight, and we'll have executive session at the next meeting to answer some questions. Board outreach survey. Hope there's any updates.
I went to the Wilmington meeting and they were gonna put it on the Wilmington Facebook page. And then the Lions Club is Monday. And double checking to see about the agenda, because I guess the power's going out on Monday, so they're not gonna make a very short meeting. But it seems like that will work.
Okay, good. And I went to the village board meeting last night, and they took copies to have at their office. Plus, they were also going to post the link on their website and on their Facebook page.
It would be good to get them at the teacher conferences.
On the 16th. I think that was the plan, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just,
As
it's, well, someone, and I don't know if they went out to staff, I talked to Miss Lindsay about it, and she was saying that they should be able to, I don't know. They're gonna send a email out for teachers and staff. I don't know if that happened. I'll look at the numbers.
And I'll be at the Lake Placid Business Association meeting next Tuesday.
Okay. And that would be because you've already presented there.
I've already presented, so
Yeah,
it's just more of a follow-up and
Yeah.
just to keep the continuity.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll stop by the village office at the end of November and pick up any that might be there too. Good, thank you. There any new agenda topics?
Budget for new chair for letters.
There's several of them that are broken.
Are there?
Yeah,
That's
they
like
don't,
a
they don't
Russian
go over
roulette
down.
when you're sitting down.
Yeah, I was gonna be a
That
little
looks
careful now,
dangerous.
yeah.
I'd be nervous about sitting down.
You didn't get
Careful,
TBI.
coming in late,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, whoever sits
Well, I
down.
tried to
whoever
raise
comes
it up,
late.
and then when I tried to raise it up, it just popped off the thing.
That's the one
I mean, you
Karen
can set
had
it back
changed.
down,
You
yeah.
might wanna-
Karen brought that
Yeah.
in, didn't
She
she?
did.
No, it was that one.
This is for later.
Yeah, I know, do it on purpose, all right.
So is there a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Thank you, Jeff. Is there a second?
Sure.
Thank you.
I'll second.
I'm assuming it's unanimous, any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.
Whatever happened? What happens?
Just have to stay here.
I can adjourn it. I can just say, if you
It's
can
override,
I
it's
can, I can
override.
say there is, since all our business has been conducted, there is no further business, we are adjourned. That's in, Robert's Rules of Order.
Oh,
I did that once the very first year, 'cause I think Karen wasn't here. And I forgot to do it. We go to executive session. I forgot to do it. Yeah, it was one of the things. What are we gonna do? Look it up. We can do this.
Basically, slide by slide, and the next question.
Great. That'd probably be me.
Karen is just.
I'll make sure I move that tomorrow, get it out of here.
yeah,
Yeah.
a letter,
You'll have to remove that.
that
first.
letter said there were 2 letters. Yes.
Yes. I got it right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night, everyone. And that letter said, good
Especially the
night,
second
Linda.
half.
Good night, Karen.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah, good, all is well.
Very safe travels.
Victoria, you doing well there first?
Two copies of our letter relating to the caption letter, finance
Right.
caption.
Was there not 2 of them?
Yeah, there's one that, but they're both the same thing, but Mary just had to sign one and send it back.
Okay. You
Coming
don't
up
want her to
or-
sign the
Well,
rest.
No, I mean, you can if you want. That's just
At least you
our
get it over
policy,
with.
so.
I don't
Well, I'll
know.
just make a copy of one.
So are we in morning?
Did you pass?
No, no, I want to tell you something.
I already have him on
You know-
suicide watch.
Ohio State, they played well against Penn State. I mean, of course, Penn State